You don't get to choose your family. That's what they always say, isn't it? They say it like it's some kind of comforting universal truth, a soft blanket to wrap around yourself when things get tough. But they never tell you the other half of the story. You don't get to choose the people you're born to, that's true. But you can always choose to walk away. The screen door slammed shut behind me, the sound swallowed by the thick, humid air of a late summer night. Behind me, the yelling continued, a tangled mess of angry, indignant voices that tried to claw at my back, to pull me back into the house I never wanted to call home. My dad, Richard, was the loudest. His voice was a booming, self-righteous thing, full of an authority he hadn't earned. His fiancée, Brenda, was right behind him, her voice a shrill counterpoint, laced with a frustration that felt both desperate and pathetic. "You can't just walk out, Leo. You have a responsibility," she shrieked, the words sharp and jagged. I didn't turn around. I just kept walking, my worn-out sneakers crunching on the gravel of the driveway. Responsibility. That word was a joke coming from them. My only responsibility was to myself. It had taken me 17 years to learn that lesson, and I wasn't about to forget it now. The streetlights cast long, lonely shadows on the sidewalk, and for a moment, I was just another shadow, slipping away into the quiet darkness of the suburbs. This wasn't a tantrum. It wasn't some teenage rebellion. It was a choice. My choice. The first one in a long time that felt truly mine. My story, the one that led me to this quiet street on a Saturday night, really started a week earlier. Or maybe it started a year ago, when my world tilted on its axis and never quite righted itself. A week earlier, it was a Tuesday. I was in my room, the only space in that house that felt like it belonged to me. It wasn't much. A bed, a desk, a rickety dresser that held the few clothes I owned. The walls were bare, a sterile off-white that I never bothered to cover with posters. There was no point in decorating a place that felt more like a waiting room than a bedroom. I was just passing through, biding my time until I turned 18. My laptop was open, the screen glowing with the familiar, comforting faces of my grandparents. Grandma Miller's face was framed by a halo of soft, white hair, her eyes crinkling at the corners as she smiled. Grandpa Miller was next to her, his expression more stoic, but I could see the warmth in his eyes. They were my anchor. The only one I had left. "How was school today, Leo?" Grandma asked, her voice crackling slightly through the laptop speakers. I shrugged, leaning closer to the microphone. It was fine. Same old stuff. Chemistry is a nightmare, but at least English is easy. And work? Mr. Henderson treating you right at the bookstore? Grandpa chimed in, his voice a low, steady rumble. Yeah, it's good. He gave me extra hours for the weekend, so the paycheck should be decent. I didn't tell them I needed those extra hours, that every dollar I earned was a step closer to freedom. I didn't want them to worry more than they already did. They had enough on their plate. Grandma's smile faded slightly, her expression turning serious. And how is she, honey? Have you been to see your mom this week? The air in my room suddenly felt heavy. Just the mention of my mom was enough to put a knot in my stomach. I pictured her in my mind, not as she was now, but as she used to be. Her laughter filling our tiny apartment, the smell of the vanilla-scented candles she always burned, the way she would ruffle my hair and call me her little lion. That version of my mom was a ghost, a memory that was getting harder to hold on to with each passing day. I'm going on Thursday, I said, keeping my voice as even as I could. The nurse said she had a good day yesterday. She was calm. Calm. That was the word they used at the hospice. Calm, stable, comfortable. They were all just gentle ways of saying she was slipping away, a little more each day. Multiple sclerosis. It had started subtly, a tingling in her fingers, a stumble here and there. We thought it was just clumsiness. But it was a monster, a relentless thief that had stolen her ability to walk, to speak clearly, to even hold a fork. A year ago, it had stolen her from our home and placed her in a facility that smelled of disinfectant and quiet despair. A place for people at the end of their lives. And that's when Richard, the man who had been a biological fact rather than a father for 16 years, had reappeared. Not with open arms or words of comfort. He had appeared with a legal document. With me moving in with him, he could finally stop paying the child support he'd complained about for my entire life. My grandparents, my mom's parents, had even offered to waive the support, to take me in themselves. But Richard had refused. He was smug about it. He's my son. No judge would rule against me, he'd said, as if I were a prize he'd won, a piece of property he was reclaiming. We'll transfer some money to your account tomorrow, Leo, Grandpa said, pulling me from my thoughts. Just a little something to make sure you're okay. You don't have to do that, I said quickly, the same way I always did. I'm fine. My job covers my expenses. I paid for my own phone, my own clothes, my own school supplies. I was a tenant in my father's house, not a son. That was the unspoken agreement. Nonsense, Grandma insisted, her voice firm but gentle. It's for emergencies. Every young man needs a little emergency fund. We're not having this argument again. I knew I wouldn't win. I nodded, a small, grateful smile touching my lips for the first time that day. Okay. Thanks, Grandma. Thanks, Grandpa. We love you, Leo, she said, blowing a kiss at the camera. Love you too, I murmured, and closed the laptop. The silence of my room pressed in on me. The warmth from the call evaporated, replaced by the familiar chill of the house. I was thirsty, so I pushed my chair back and opened my door. The living room was a world away. Richard was on the couch, his eyes glued to a sports channel on the massive flat-screen TV that was his pride and joy. Brenda was on the floor, trying to coax a spoonful of mashed carrots into the mouth of their 6-month-old, Liam. Their 3-year-old, Lily, was running in circles around the coffee table, babbling a song about a princess and a dragon. This was their family. A perfect, noisy, suburban picture. And I was a ghost walking through it. I moved silently towards the kitchen. No one looked up. No one said hello. Richard grunted, a sound of annoyance that might have been directed at the TV or at my presence, it was impossible to tell. Brenda was too absorbed in her maternal duties, her face a mask of concentration. I felt like an intruder, a foreign element that didn't fit into their domestic equation. I opened the fridge, the cool air a welcome relief. I grabbed a bottle of water and was about to retreat back to the safety of my room when Richard's voice cut through the air. He didn't even turn to look at me. You know, he said, his eyes still on the screen, living here isn't a free ride. You're 17. You could at least offer to help out around here. Take out the trash, mow the lawn. Something. It wasn't a request. It was an accusation. A reminder of my place. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, the cold water bottle in my hand, my knuckles white. I already took out the trash. I already mowed the lawn. He just never noticed. Or maybe he did, and this was just his way of making sure I knew I was indebted to him. I closed the fridge door with a quiet click and walked back to my room without a word. As I shut my door, I heard Brenda's voice, softer now. Richard, don't be so hard on him. And his reply, low and bitter. Hard on him? I'm paying for a roof over his head. The least he can do is not be a ghost in my own house. I leaned my head against the cool wood of the door and closed my eyes. A ghost. Maybe he was right. I was just a shadow of the boy I used to be, the one who had a mom, a home, a life. I took a long drink of water and tried to wash the bitterness out of my throat. Lying in bed that night, I let myself think of her. Just for a minute. I pictured her in the garden of our old apartment complex. It was a small, scraggly patch of grass, but she had planted sunflowers in one corner. She loved sunflowers. She said they always knew where to find the light. She was sitting on a bench, her face tilted up towards the sun, a genuine, unburdened smile on her face. Her hair was still a rich brown, not yet touched by the gray that came with the pain. I was about 10 years old, running towards her with a dandelion in my hand. "Make a wish, Mom," I'd yelled, holding it out to her. She had laughed, a sound like wind chimes, and gently blew the white seeds into the air. They danced around us like tiny fairies. "What did you wish for?" I asked. She had pulled me into a hug, her arms strong and safe around me. "I wished that you would always be this happy, my little lion." A single, hot tear escaped my eye and traced a path down my temple, disappearing into my pillow. It was a stupid wish. An impossible wish. Happiness felt like a foreign country, a place I had a passport for but could no longer visit. I wiped my face with the back of my hand and forced the memory away. Thinking about the past only made the present hurt more. I had to be strong. For her. And for me. Because I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that no one else in this house would be. The rest of the week passed in a blur of school, work, and carefully orchestrated avoidance. I became an expert at timing my trips to the kitchen for when no one was there. I ate my meals in my room, the sound of my grandparents' voices on a podcast filling the silence. I was a ship passing in the night, and that was exactly how I wanted it. On Thursday, I took the bus to the hospice. The building was modern and clean, with large windows that let in a lot of light, but nothing could hide the underlying sadness that clung to the walls. It smelled like floor polish and finality. I found my mom in her room, sleeping in a reclining chair by the window. The disease had whittled her down, making her look fragile and small, like a bird with a broken wing. Her hands, which once held me so tightly, now lay limp in her lap. I sat in the visitor's chair, just watching her breathe. In and out. In and out. It was the only sound in the room. I didn't try to wake her. Sometimes, it was easier this way. I could pretend we were just sitting in comfortable silence, the way we used to. I talked to her anyway, my voice a soft whisper. I told her about my chemistry test, about the funny old man who bought a book on gardening at the store, about how Grandpa Miller was trying to learn how to bake bread and had covered the entire kitchen in flour. I told her I missed her. I told her I loved her. I don't know if she heard me. Her expression didn't change. But as I got up to leave, her fingers twitched, just a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. It was probably just a muscle spasm. But I held on to it. I let myself believe it was her way of saying she was still there, still fighting, still my mom. Leaving that place always felt like tearing a part of myself away. The bus ride back to Richard's house was a journey between two worlds. One was a world of profound, quiet grief. The other was a world of loud, shallow noise. And I was stuck in the middle, a boy who belonged in neither. When I got back, the house was in its usual state of controlled chaos. Brenda was on the phone, pacing back and forth, while Lily chased the cat under the dining table. Richard wasn't home yet. I slipped past them, hoping to make it to my room unnoticed. But Brenda saw me. She ended her call abruptly. "Leo, thank God you're here." I froze, my hand on the doorknob to my room. "Listen," she said, walking towards me, a look on her face I hadn't seen before. It was a mix of excitement and something else, calculation. "Richard and I have something really special planned for this Saturday. It's an anniversary of sorts. It's really, really important to me." I just stared at her, not understanding where this was going. We didn't do conversations. We didn't do sharing. She took a deep breath, her smile widening. "So, we're going to need you to babysit." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and unwelcome. "We're going to need you to babysit." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, an assumption so blatant it momentarily stole my breath. She said it with a bright, expectant smile, as if she were offering me a gift, as if she couldn't possibly imagine me saying anything other than yes. I just looked at her. My mind was still half stuck in the quiet, sterile room at the hospice, with the scent of antiseptic and the sound of my mom's shallow breathing. The contrast between that world of quiet suffering and this world of casual demands was jarring. It felt like being thrown into ice-cold water. Babysit? I repeated, my voice flat. Yes, she chirped, clapping her hands together softly. Just for the afternoon and evening. It'll be fun. Lily adores you, you know. And Liam is an easy baby, he mostly just sleeps. Lily did not adore me. Lily barely knew I existed. She was a 3-year-old who was fascinated by anyone who wasn't her mom or dad for a few minutes, before her attention inevitably shifted to a shiny object or a cartoon on TV. And I had no idea if Liam was an easy baby or not. I'd never spent more than 5 consecutive minutes in the same room as him. I was a stranger to these children. I didn't answer right away. I was trying to process the sheer audacity of it. They weren't asking me. They were informing me. They had made their plans that were really, really important to them, and I was simply a logistical component, a free, convenient solution to their childcare problem. My silence seemed to make Brenda a little nervous. Her smile tightened at the edges. It's this Saturday, she repeated, as if I hadn't heard. We'd be gone for maybe 6 or 7 hours. We'll leave you money for pizza. Pizza. As if a $20 bill could purchase my compliance, as if it made the transaction fair. I felt a slow, cold anger begin to uncoil in my gut. It wasn't a hot, explosive anger, but a heavy, weary kind. The anger of someone who was tired of being treated like an inconvenience, an afterthought, a tool to be used and then put away. Richard chose that moment to walk through the door, whistling a cheerful, off-key tune. He dropped his briefcase by the entrance and loosened his tie. "What's going on?" he asked, seeing the two of us standing in the hallway. Brenda's face immediately brightened. "I was just telling Leo about our plans for Saturday." "Ah, right," Richard said, walking over and slinging an arm around her shoulder. He looked at me, a wide, salesman's smile plastered on his face. It was the same smile he used on neighbors and clients, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, buddy. We need you to step up. Be the man of the house for a few hours. It'll be good for you. Build character. Build character." The words were so condescending, so utterly clueless, that I almost laughed. My character had been forged in the fires of watching my mother's health deteriorate, of learning to cook and clean and manage a household by the time I was 15, of dealing with the crushing weight of grief and fear every single day. Watching a couple of kids for a few hours wasn't going to build character. It was an insult. I looked from his smiling face to Brenda's hopeful one. I could see the whole scenario playing out in my head. Me, stuck in that living room, trying to figure out a baby's feeding schedule while a toddler had a meltdown over the wrong color cup. Me, being held captive in a house that wasn't my home, responsible for children who weren't my siblings, for a family that wasn't my own. All so they could go out and celebrate their special anniversary. And I just couldn't do it. A line had been drawn. Not by me, but by them. They had crossed it without a second thought. I finally found my voice. "I have plans on Saturday," I said. The lie came out easily, a shield I threw up without hesitation. Richard's smile faltered. "Plans? What plans? You've got work, right?" "No," I said, my voice steady. "I have the day off. I made plans with a friend." Another lie, but a necessary one. I didn't have any friends, not really. Not since I'd moved here. My life was too complicated for friendships. Brenda's face fell, her disappointment palpable. Oh, she said, her voice small. Well, can't you cancel them? This is really important, Leo. Why was it my responsibility to cancel my imaginary plans for their very real ones? The question hung in the air, unspoken. The unfairness of it was staggering. Richard dropped the friendly act. His jaw tightened. Listen, Leo. This isn't a negotiation. We're your parents, and we're telling you that we need you here on Saturday. Your friend can wait. You're not my parent, I said, my eyes locking with his. You're my father. There's a difference. And Brenda was nothing to me. She was just a woman my father was engaged to. The shot landed. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, anger, maybe even a hint of shame before it was quickly covered up. He took a step forward, his posture becoming more intimidating. I am providing a roof over your head. The least you can do is show a little gratitude and help out when you're asked. This is a family. We help each other. This is not a family, I said, the words coming out colder than I intended. This is a house. A house I live in because my mom is sick. That's it. You wanted me here so you could stop paying child support. Let's not pretend it's anything more than that. The truth, spoken so plainly, sucked all the air out of the hallway. Brenda gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Richard's face turned a dark, blotchy red. He looked like he wanted to hit me. For a second, I thought he might. But he didn't. He just stood there, speechless, his chest heaving. I knew I had gone too far. Not because I was wrong, but because I had shattered the fragile illusion they had built around themselves. I had held up a mirror, and they didn't like the reflection. I took the opportunity to make my escape. I'm not babysitting, I said, my voice quiet but firm. You'll have to find someone else. I turned the knob and slipped into my room, closing the door behind me and locking it. I could hear their muffled voices through the door, a heated, whispered argument. I leaned against the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I hadn't planned for a confrontation. I just wanted to be left alone. But they had pushed me, and I had pushed back. The battle lines were drawn. The next day and a half were thick with a tense, suffocating silence. Whenever I did have to leave my room, Richard would pointedly ignore me, his jaw set in a hard line. Brenda would give me these wounded, pleading looks, as if I had personally betrayed her. It was emotional blackmail, plain and simple, and I refused to fall for it. I ate meals I'd bought myself in my room, I did my homework, I counted the hours. I felt a sliver of guilt, not for them, but for the situation. I hated conflict. I hated the tension. A small part of me whispered that it would be easier to just give in, to babysit for a few hours and keep the peace. But a louder, stronger part of me knew that if I gave in this time, it would never end. I would become the default, the unpaid, on-call sitter. My time, my life, would be secondary to their whims. And I couldn't let that happen. My life was already so small, so constrained. I had to protect the little bit of it that was still mine. Saturday morning arrived, gray and overcast, matching my mood. I had woken up early, a nervous energy buzzing under my skin. I didn't know what their plan was. Had they found another sitter? Would they try to force me again? Around 10 o'clock, I heard them moving around, getting ready. I heard the shower running, the sound of a hairdryer, Brenda's cheerful but forced laughter. They were going ahead with their plans. My stomach twisted. What did that mean for me? I stayed in my room, my door locked, my headphones on, trying to drown out the sounds of the house. But I couldn't focus. I was waiting for the knock on the door, for the final confrontation. It came around 11. A sharp, insistent rap on my door. It was Richard. Leo, open up. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. I took a deep breath, unlocked the door, and opened it a crack. He was standing there, already dressed in a collared shirt and slacks. Brenda was behind him, holding Liam, who was bundled up in a blue onesie. "Brenda and I are leaving now," Richard said, his eyes hard. "She's going to give you the rundown on the kids' schedules. Don't mess this up." He didn't wait for a response. He just turned and walked away, grabbing his keys from the hook by the door. A moment later, I heard the front door open and close. He had just left. He had abandoned me on the battlefield, leaving Brenda to deliver the final orders. It was a coward's move, and it was so quintessentially him. Brenda stepped forward, a strained smile on her face. "Okay," she said, bouncing Liam gently. "So, he gets a bottle at noon, and then again at 3. The milk is in the fridge, all portioned out. You just have to warm it up. Not too hot, though. And Lily gets her lunch at 12:30. Mac and cheese is fine, it's in the blue box. She can watch an hour of TV, but that's it. Then she needs to have a nap." She kept talking, her voice a droning litany of instructions and schedules. But I wasn't listening. I was watching her, and all I could see was a woman who was so wrapped up in her own world that she couldn't see the person standing in front of her. She didn't see a grieving teenage boy who just wanted to be left alone. She saw a solution. A convenience. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a quiet, clean break. The last thread of obligation, of doubt, of any desire to keep the peace, just severed. I held up a hand, and she finally stopped talking, looking at me with a confused expression. "No," I said. Her brow furrowed. "No. What do you mean, no?" "I mean, no," I repeated, my voice calm, almost detached. "I'm not doing this. I told you. I'm not babysitting." Her face went from confused to incredulous to furious in the space of about 5 seconds. "What are you talking about? Richard just left. We're all ready to go. You can't do this now." "I can," I said. "And I am." I stepped back into my room and grabbed the worn leather wallet from my desk and my phone. That was all I needed. I walked past her, towards the front door. Lily was in the living room, watching me with wide, curious eyes. Brenda's voice rose, cracking with panic. "Leo! Where are you going? Stop! You can't just leave. The kids will be alone." I paused at the door, my hand on the knob, and looked back at her. She was standing there, a baby in her arms, her face a mask of disbelief. "Their mother is right here," I said, my voice cold and clear. "They're not alone." And with that, I opened the door and walked out into the gray morning, not looking back. Her yells followed me down the driveway, desperate and angry, but they sounded far away, like they were coming from another world. A world I no longer had to be a part of. I kept walking, my pace quick and steady, my head held high. I had no idea where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay there. The air outside was cool and damp, carrying the smell of rain that had yet to fall. It felt clean, washing away the stuffy, claustrophobic atmosphere of the house. I shoved my hands in the pockets of my hoodie and walked, putting as much distance as I could between me and Brenda's frantic yells. I didn't run. I walked with a purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. Each step on the cracked pavement was a declaration of independence. I didn't have a destination. My plans with a friend had been a lie, a flimsy shield that had now become my reality. I had nowhere to be, no one to see. I was just out. The freedom was both exhilarating and terrifying. For the first time in a year, my time was completely my own, but I had no idea what to do with it. I walked for what felt like miles, past endless rows of identical houses with perfectly manicured lawns and minivans in the driveways. Each one was a little diorama of a life I didn't understand and didn't belong to. This was Richard's world, Brenda's world. A world of parent-teacher conferences, neighborhood barbecues, and weekend plans that were so, very important. It felt like a foreign country. My feet eventually led me to the small downtown area of our town, a 3-block stretch of brick buildings with small businesses on the ground floor. There was a coffee shop, a hardware store, an antique shop with dusty furniture in the window, and at the very end of the block, the public library. The library. It was a haven. A quiet, anonymous place where no one expected anything from you. I pulled open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside, the scent of old paper and silence enveloping me like a hug. I wandered through the stacks, my fingers trailing along the spines of the books. History, fiction, science, poetry. Each one was a self-contained world, a place to escape to. I wasn't much of a reader, but I appreciated the possibility of it all. I found a deserted corral in the back corner, overlooking a small, untended garden. I sat down and just breathed. The adrenaline from the morning's confrontation began to fade, replaced by a profound sense of exhaustion. I pulled out my phone. No missed calls, no texts. Not from Richard, not from Brenda. I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. Maybe they had found another solution. Maybe their very important plans had been salvaged. A part of me, a small, foolish part, almost hoped they had. It would make things easier. But another, more realistic part of me knew that wasn't the case. I had thrown a wrench into their perfectly calibrated machine. There would be consequences. I just didn't know what they would be yet. To kill time, I put in my earbuds and scrolled through a podcast app. I found one my grandparents had recommended, a show about historical mysteries. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window and let the narrator's calm, deep voice fill my head, talking about lost ships and forgotten kings. It was a welcome distraction, a way to occupy the part of my brain that wanted to spiral into anxiety. Hours drifted by. I must have dozed off at some point, because I was startled awake by the gentle tap of a librarian on my shoulder. "Son, we're closing in 15 minutes," she said, her voice soft. I blinked, disoriented. I looked at my phone. It was almost 5 o'clock. I had been gone for nearly 6 hours. The thought sent a fresh jolt of anxiety through me. The confrontation wasn't over. It had just been postponed. I thanked the librarian and gathered my things. Stepping back outside, I realized I was hungry. Starving, actually. I hadn't eaten since a bowl of cereal early that morning. I checked my wallet. I had $27. Enough for a decent meal. I walked to a small diner a block away, the kind of place with red vinyl booths and a jukebox in the corner. I slid into a booth by the window and ordered a cheeseburger and a Coke. As I ate, I watched the people outside. Families walking together, couples holding hands. A dad lifted his little girl onto his shoulders, and she squealed with delight. For a moment, I felt a sharp, stabbing pang of loneliness. It was a familiar feeling, a constant companion, but sometimes it caught me off guard and knocked the wind out of me. I was an island. I had my grandparents, yes, and I was so grateful for them. But they were an hour's drive away. They weren't here, in the day-to-day trenches. And my mom was here, but she wasn't. She was a fading photograph. I pushed the feeling down, focusing on my food. Loneliness was a luxury I couldn't afford. It was a weakness. I had to be strong. Self-sufficient. I paid my bill, leaving a decent tip, and stepped back out into the evening air. I couldn't put it off any longer. I had to go back. I couldn't wander the streets all night. I started the long walk home, my steps much heavier than they had been that morning. The anger that had propelled me forward had been replaced by a grim sense of resignation. Whatever was waiting for me, I had to face it. As I turned onto my street, I saw Richard's car in the driveway. So he was back. The house was lit up, every window glowing. It looked almost welcoming from a distance. But I knew better. It was the lure of an anglerfish, a bright light hiding a monster. I took a deep breath, walked up the driveway, and opened the front door. The scene in the living room was exactly what I had expected, only worse. Richard and Brenda were sitting on the couch, side by side, like two judges about to deliver a verdict. Their faces were stormy, their posture rigid with anger. The two kids were nowhere to be seen, probably put to bed early. The silence was absolute, and it was ringing with accusation. Richard was the first to speak, his voice dangerously low. "Where have you been?" "Out," I said simply, closing the door behind me. "Out," he repeated, a humorless laugh escaping his lips. "You walk out on your family, you disappear for the entire day, and all you have to say for yourself is, 'out.'" "You're not my family," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. I was too tired to play games. Brenda needed a sitter. Her plans got cancelled. I get it. I'm sorry her plans were ruined, but it wasn't my responsibility. "It wasn't your responsibility?" Brenda's voice was shrill, cutting through the tension. "I am going to be your stepmother, Leo. Those children are your siblings. How can you say it's not your responsibility?" "They are not my siblings," I said, my gaze unwavering. "Liam is my half-brother, I guess. Lily is not related to me at all. And you are not my stepmother. You are the woman my father is engaged to. We live in the same house. That is all we are to each other." I knew I was being cruel, but I was also being honest. Their attempt to force this ready-made family on me, to assign me a role I never asked for, had backfired. They wanted the cozy picture of a blended family without putting in any of the work, any of the empathy. "You ungrateful little brat," Richard spat, standing up. He was taller than me, broader. He used his physical presence to intimidate, a tactic he'd probably learned in some corporate sales seminar. "I give you a home. I put food on the table. I keep you out of the foster care system, and this is the thanks I get. You embarrass Brenda, you ruin our anniversary, and you act like you're the victim here." "A home?" I shot back, my own anger finally flaring. "This isn't a home. This is a business transaction. I'm here so you don't have to write a check every month. You haven't asked me a single question about my life, about my school, about Mom, since the day I moved in. You don't care about me. You just care about the money I save you." Every word was a bullet, and I could see them hitting their mark. Richard's face contorted with fury. Brenda looked horrified, as if I had just revealed a dirty, secret truth that she had been trying very hard to ignore. "That is not true," she cried. "Richard loves you. We both do. We're trying to be a family." "No, you're not," I said, my voice dropping, the anger draining away, leaving only that familiar exhaustion. "You're trying to play house. And I don't want to be one of your dolls. I'm not going to be your built-in babysitter. I'm telling you right now, so there are no misunderstandings in the future, I will never, ever babysit for you. If you need a sitter, you need to hire one. Because it will not be me. And if you ever try to corner me like you did this morning, I will walk out again. Every single time." I laid it all out, my one and only boundary, clear and sharp and non-negotiable. I wanted them to understand, down to their bones, that this was a line they could not cross again. Brenda started to cry, soft, heaving sobs. It was a tactic, I knew it was. She was trying to make me the bad guy, the one who made the nice lady cry. "I had to cancel my spa day," she whispered through her tears. "And our dinner reservation. It was a special day, and you ruined it." I almost felt sorry for her, for a split second. But then the absurdity of it all hit me. I had spent my afternoon at the hospice, watching my own mother fade away, and she was trying to guilt-trip me over a cancelled spa day. The lack of perspective was breathtaking. "Why is that my problem?" I asked, the question genuine. I truly didn't understand the logic. Why is it my fault that you didn't have a backup plan? You're a parent. Parents are supposed to have backup plans. You can't just assume a 17-year-old will drop everything to solve your problems for you. My bluntness seemed to shock her into silence. Her crying sputtered to a halt. She just stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. Richard, however, was not shocked. He was enraged. That's it, he said, pointing a finger at my face. You're grounded. For a month. No phone, no laptop, no going out except for school and work. You can take my phone, I said with a shrug. I paid for it, but you can take it. You can take the laptop, it's from the school anyway. But you can't stop me from leaving this house. I'm not your prisoner. Before he could respond, a new sound interrupted our standoff. The doorbell. It rang once, loud and piercing in the tense silence. Brenda's head snapped up. A look of relief washed over her face. That's my sister, she said, wiping her eyes. I called her. I told her what you did. Oh, great, I thought, a fresh wave of weariness washing over me. They were calling in reinforcements. Brenda rushed to the door and pulled it open. A woman who was a slightly older, harder-looking version of Brenda swept into the room. She had the same blonde hair, but hers was styled in a severe, no-nonsense bob. Her eyes, sharp and judgmental, immediately landed on me. I had never seen this woman before in my life. This is him, she asked, not even looking at Brenda. Her voice was like gravel. Karen, this is Leo, Brenda said meekly. Karen ignored the introduction. She strode right up to me, crossing her arms over her chest. She looked me up and down, her lip curled in a sneer. So, she began, her voice dripping with disdain. You're the one. The ungrateful little charity case who thinks the world revolves around him. I heard all about how you ruined my sister's special day. Her words hit me like a physical slap. Charity case. The term was designed to strip me of any dignity, to reduce me to nothing more than a burden my father had magnanimously shouldered. And it came from a complete stranger, a woman who had just walked into the house and immediately appointed herself judge, jury, and executioner. I just stared at her. I didn't have the energy for another fight. My emotional reserves were completely drained. This woman, Karen, was a caricature of every entitled, meddling person I'd ever had the misfortune of encountering. She was here as a hired gun, brought in to deliver the final, crushing blow. I don't know who you are, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. I'm Karen, Brenda's sister, she snapped, as if that gave her some divine right to interfere. And I'm not going to stand by and watch some moody teenager treat my family like dirt. My family. The way she said it, possessive and fierce, made it clear that I was not included in that definition. I was the outsider, the invader. What you did today was cruel, you know that, she continued, her voice rising. She was warming up now, getting into her rhythm. Brenda was looking forward to this day for weeks. She worked so hard, taking care of these two beautiful children, taking care of your father, trying to build a nice home. And you, with all your teenage angst and your daddy issues, you decide to throw a tantrum and ruin everything for everyone. Daddy issues. The phrase was so cliché, so dismissive. It was a lazy, pop psychology label slapped onto a situation she couldn't possibly comprehend. My issues weren't with my daddy. My issues were with Richard, the man who had abandoned his responsibilities for 16 years and now wanted to play the part of a father without any of the sacrifice. My issues were with a world that had taken my mother from me and stranded me in this emotional wasteland. I could have told her that. I could have explained the complexities, the grief, the crushing weight of it all. But what was the point? Her eyes were hard and unforgiving. She wasn't interested in understanding. She was interested in winning. So I did the only thing I had the strength left to do. I rolled my eyes. It was a small gesture, but it was incredibly potent. It was a dismissal of her entire self-righteous tirade. It said, "You are not worth my anger. You are not worth my words. You are ridiculous." Karen's face, which was already flushed with anger, turned a shade of crimson. "Don't you roll your eyes at me, you little punk," she screeched, taking a step closer. Richard put a hand on her arm, not to restrain her, but more in a gesture of solidarity. "He's been like this all night, Karen," Brenda sniffled from the couch, expertly playing the victim. "He said horrible things. He said we weren't a family." "Well, he's making it pretty clear he doesn't want to be part of one," Karen retorted, her eyes still locked on me. "You know, some kids would be grateful for a second chance. A chance to have a real, stable home with two parents. But not you. You'd rather wallow in your own misery and make everyone else miserable too. You're taking your anger about your dad out on my sister and her innocent children." Innocent children. Her nibblings, as the original Reddit post had so perfectly put it. That was the core of it. To her, I was a threat to her sister's perfect new life. I was the inconvenient, moody stepson from a previous, messy life, and I wasn't playing my part correctly. I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger anymore. It was a strange, liberating clarity. I saw the three of them, Richard, Brenda, and now Karina, as a single entity. They were a team. And I was the opposition. There was no middle ground, no hope for a truce. They would never see my side. They would never understand my pain. They would only ever see me as a problem to be managed. And in that moment, I knew I was done. Not just for the night. I was done for good. I didn't say another word to them. I turned my back on Karen's sputtering rage, on Brenda's crocodile tears, on Richard's silent, simmering fury. I walked out of the living room, down the short hallway, and back to my room. "Where do you think you're going?" Richard called after me. "We are not finished here." I ignored him. I closed my bedroom door, but this time, I didn't lock it. There was no need. I wasn't going to be staying long enough for it to matter. My movements were swift and mechanical. I grabbed the backpack I used for school. I opened my dresser and pulled out a few t-shirts, some socks, and a couple pairs of jeans, rolling them up tightly and stuffing them inside. I grabbed my phone charger from the wall socket and my toothbrush from the cup on my desk. I looked around the room, this sterile white box that had been my cage for the past year. Was there anything else I needed? Anything I cared about? My eyes fell on a small, framed photo on my nightstand. It was the only personal item I had displayed. It was a picture of me and my mom, taken at a fall festival a few years ago, before she got really sick. We were both grinning, our cheeks red from the cold, and I was holding up a ridiculously large candy apple. Her arm was around my shoulder, and she was looking at me with so much love, so much pride. I carefully wrapped the photo in a sweatshirt and tucked it into the deepest part of my backpack. That was it. That was all I needed. The rest was just stuff. I zipped up the backpack and swung it over my shoulder. It felt heavy, but it was a good kind of heavy. A substantial weight. I was carrying my entire life on my back, and it felt right. I walked back out into the hallway. The three of them were still in the living room, their argument having died down into a tense, hushed conference. They all looked up as I appeared, their eyes widening in surprise as they saw the backpack. "What is this?" Richard demanded, his voice a mixture of confusion and anger. "Are you running away? Is that your brilliant plan?" "I'm not running away," I said calmly. "I'm leaving. There's a difference." I walked right past them, towards the front door. This time, I didn't hesitate. "Leo, stop!" Brenda cried, jumping up from the couch. "Don't be so dramatic. We can talk about this." "No, we can't," I said, my hand on the doorknob. I looked at them one last time, the three of them standing there like a tableau of dysfunction. You had your chance to talk. You decided to yell instead. And to bring in a stranger to yell at me too. I'm done talking. I turned to my father. I hope you got what you wanted, Richard, I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. No more child support. It was worth it, right? He didn't have an answer for that. He just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. I pulled the door open and stepped out into the cool night air. I closed it firmly behind me, the click of the latch sounding like a final, definitive period at the end of a very long, very painful sentence. I walked down the driveway and onto the sidewalk, not looking back. I didn't know where I was going to sleep that night. I didn't know what would happen tomorrow. All I knew was that I was free. The weight on my shoulders felt a little lighter with every step I took. I walked to the end of the block and stood under the yellow glow of a street lamp. I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking slightly, but my mind was clear. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed. I pressed the call button and held the phone to my ear. It rang twice before a familiar, sleepy voice answered. Hello? Grandpa? I said, my own voice sounding rougher than I expected. Leo? Is that you? What's wrong? It's almost 11 o'clock. His voice was instantly alert, sharp with concern. A lump formed in my throat. I swallowed hard, forcing it down. I couldn't break down now. Not yet. I left, I said, the words coming out in a rush. I left Richard's house. I packed a bag. I can't stay there anymore, Grandpa. I just can't. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, and in that moment, a terrifying thought shot through me. What if they say no? What if they tell me to go back? But then his voice came, firm and steady and full of a certainty that felt like a lifeline. Okay, son. Okay. You did the right thing. Where are you right now? I'm at the corner of my street, I told him. Don't move, he said, and I could hear the sound of rustling in the background, the jingle of keys. I'm coming to get you. I'll be there in an hour. Just stay on the phone with me until you see my headlights, okay? Okay, I whispered, relief washing over me so powerfully that my knees felt weak. I had to lean against the lamppost to steady myself. Okay, Grandpa. I wasn't alone. I had a place to go. As I waited, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. The screen lit up with Richard's name. I stared at it for a moment, then my thumb moved, pressing the red decline button. A few seconds later, a text message notification popped up. I didn't even open it. I blocked his number. Then I blocked Brenda's. I didn't want to hear their threats, their fake apologies, their demands. It was over. About an hour later, just as Grandpa had promised, a pair of familiar headlights turned onto the street. The old, reliable Ford pickup truck pulled up beside me, and the passenger door swung open. Get in, son, Grandpa Miller said, his face etched with worry but his eyes full of love. I climbed into the truck and sank into the worn seat. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. He reached over and gave my shoulder a firm squeeze. You're safe now, he said. And for the first time all day, I believed it. We were about 10 minutes into the drive when his phone rang. He had it connected to the truck's Bluetooth system, and the name, Richard, flashed on the small screen on the dashboard. Grandpa glanced at me, his jaw tight. You want me to take this? I nodded slowly. I wanted to hear what he would say. I wanted to be a witness to my own liberation. Grandpa pressed a button on the steering wheel. Long, he said, his voice as cold as steel. Where is he? Richard's voice blared through the speakers, angry and demanding. You tell me where my son is right now. I have custody, and you have no right to take him. Your son is with me, where he's safe, Grandpa replied, his voice calm but lethal. And don't you dare talk to me about your rights. A right comes with a responsibility, Richard. A concept you've never managed to grasp. You didn't want a son. You wanted a pawn to get you out of paying child support. You wanted a free servant to take care of your new family. Well, that's over. That's not, Richard started, but Grandpa cut him off. I'm telling you this once, so listen carefully. Leo is staying with us. He will not be coming back to your house. And if you try to fight this, if you even think about dragging him into a courtroom, I will hire the best lawyer in the state. We won't just talk about custody, Richard. We'll talk about 16 years of neglect. We'll talk about emotional abuse. We'll talk about the fact that you tried to exploit your grieving son as an unpaid babysitter. How do you think that's going to look in front of a judge? The line went dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the truck's engine and the rhythmic thump of the tires on the highway. Richard, the man who was so confident he would win in any court, was utterly speechless. He had been so used to holding all the power, and now, faced with a real threat, a real consequence, he crumbled. After a few seconds of silence, the call ended. He had hung up. Grandpa reached over and pressed a button, turning on the radio. A quiet country song filled the cab of the truck. He didn't say anything else. He just drove, his eyes on the road ahead, taking me home. The rest of the drive to my grandparents' house was quiet. The country song on the radio faded into another, and the dark highway stretched out before us, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the sleeping countryside. I watched the trees blur past the window, feeling the tension slowly seep out of my muscles. The confrontation with Richard over the truck's speakers had been the final nail in the coffin. Hearing my grandfather dismantle him so calmly and completely was more satisfying than any angry words I could have ever spoken. It was validation. It was protection. It was everything I hadn't had for the past year. When we finally pulled into their long, gravel driveway, the house was lit up. Grandma Miller was waiting on the porch, a silhouette against the warm, yellow light spilling from the windows. She had a thick, knitted cardigan wrapped around her, and her face was a mess of worry and relief. The moment I stepped out of the truck, she was there, wrapping me in a hug that smelled like cinnamon and safety. She held me tight, not saying a word, just holding on as if to reassure herself that I was real and I was there. I buried my face in her shoulder and felt the last of my composure crack. The tears I had been holding back all day finally came, hot and silent. I wasn't sobbing or making a sound. It was just a quiet, steady release of all the fear, the anger, and the profound loneliness I had been carrying. "It's okay, honey," she whispered, her hand stroking the back of my head. "You're home now. You're home. Home." The word felt strange and wonderful. This small, rambling house filled with mismatched furniture and decades of love, this was home. Not the sterile, soulless house I had just left behind. Grandpa came and stood beside us, placing a heavy, comforting hand on my back. "Let's get him inside, Martha. The boy looks exhausted." They led me into the kitchen, which was warm and smelled of freshly brewed tea. A plate of sandwiches sat on the table, covered in plastic wrap. Grandma had been waiting up, ready for me. The simple gesture of care, of anticipation, was so foreign and so welcome that it made my throat tighten again. I wasn't hungry, but I sat at the table and drank the sweet, hot tea she placed in front of me. They didn't pepper me with questions. They didn't ask for every sordid detail of the fight. They just sat with me, letting the quiet of the kitchen work its magic. They gave me space to breathe. "The guest room is all ready for you," Grandma said after a while, her voice soft. "Clean sheets on the bed. You can sleep as late as you want tomorrow." I nodded, feeling a bone-deep weariness settle over me. "Thank you," I murmured. "For everything." "Don't you ever thank us for this, Leo," Grandpa said, his voice gruff but kind. "You're our grandson. This is where you belong. That night, I slept in a bed that didn't feel like a temporary cot in a stranger's house. I was wrapped in a heavy quilt that Grandma had made years ago, and for the first time in a year, I didn't dream. I just fell into a deep, blessedly empty sleep. The next few days passed in a gentle blur. I helped Grandpa fix a section of fence in the backyard, the repetitive, physical work a balm for my frayed nerves. I sat with Grandma in the kitchen while she baked, the sweet smells filling the house. We talked, but not about Richard or Brenda. We talked about my mom, sharing stories and memories of her. We talked about my plans for the future, about college and what I might want to study. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a terrifying, abstract concept I had to survive until. It felt like something I could actually build. My grandparents handled the logistics with quiet efficiency. They called my school and explained the situation, arranging for me to transfer. It turned out their district was close enough that I could stay enrolled in my current school, I would just have a longer bus ride. They didn't make a big deal out of it. They just solved the problem. Richard didn't call again. There were no more angry texts, no demands. It was as if my grandfather's words had erected an impenetrable wall. The silence was deafening, and it was beautiful. It was the sound of peace. But as the days turned into a week, a new kind of anxiety began to creep in. It was a low-level hum of guilt and worry. Not about Richard, but about my mom. The hospice was in Richard's town. It was a 15-minute bus ride from his house. From my grandparents' house, it was over an hour away, and the bus routes were complicated. I knew I had to go see her. I couldn't let my own drama, my own escape, keep me from her. She was the reason this all started. She was the center of my world, even if her world had become so small. On Friday, a week after I had left, I finally worked up the nerve to bring it up. I need to go see Mom, I said at the dinner table. Grandma and Grandpa exchanged a look. It wasn't a look of annoyance, but of shared concern. Of course you do, honey, Grandma said. We'll figure it out. Your grandfather can drive you tomorrow. No, I said quickly. I don't want you to have to do that. It's a long drive. I can take the bus. I've looked it up. It's a couple of transfers, but I can do it. Leo, it's no trouble, Grandpa started. Please, I insisted. I need to do it myself. I need to know I can get to her on my own. They understood. That was the thing about them. They always understood the unspoken things, the needs that hid behind the words. They saw that this wasn't just about visiting my mom. It was about proving to myself that I hadn't abandoned her, that my new life didn't mean leaving her behind. The next day, I set out early. The bus journey was long and tedious. I spent nearly 2 hours staring out the window at unfamiliar towns, my stomach churning with a nervous energy. What if she was worse? What if she had been asking for me? What if the nurses told Richard the first hadn't been there all week? When I finally walked into the hospice, the familiar smell of antiseptic hit me, but this time it was mixed with a new sense of trepidation. I walked down the quiet, polished hallway to her room and paused at the door, taking a deep breath before pushing it open. She was awake. Her chair was positioned by the window, and her eyes were open, though her gaze was distant and unfocused. A nurse I didn't recognize was gently brushing her hair. Hello, the nurse said, smiling at me. You must be Leo. Your mother has been waiting for you. My heart clenched. She has? Oh, yes, the nurse said, her voice kind. She gets a little restless around this time every day. It's good you're here. She finished brushing my mom's hair and patted her shoulder. I'll leave you two alone. I pulled the visitor's chair close to hers. Hey, Mom, I said softly. Her eyes slowly shifted, finding my face. There was a flicker of recognition, a spark in the cloudy depths. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. It's me, Mom. It's Leo, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I took her hand. It felt so frail, so delicate, like a bird's wing. I'm sorry I haven't been here for a few days. A lot has happened. I moved out of Dad's house. I didn't know if she could understand me, but I had to tell her. I had to confess. I'm living with Grandma and Grandpa now, I continued, my voice a low murmur. It's good. It's quiet. They're taking care of me. You don't have to worry about me, Mom. I'm okay. I'm safe. I told her everything. I told her about the fight, about Brenda and her sister, about walking out in the middle of the day. I told her about Grandpa's phone call in the truck and the feeling of relief when I arrived at their house. I just let it all pour out, all the things I had been holding inside. As I spoke, her thumb began to move, rubbing back and forth against my hand. It was a small, repetitive motion, but it was deliberate. It was her. She was listening. She was comforting me, even now, from the depths of her illness. I miss you, I whispered, tears blurring my vision. I miss you so much. I sat with her for hours, just holding her hand and talking, sometimes just sitting in silence. It was peaceful. The anxiety I had carried with me on the bus had vanished, replaced by a deep, quiet sense of connection. This was my real family. This woman, who could barely move or speak, was more of a home to me than Richard's entire house. When it was time to leave, I leaned down and kissed her on the forehead. I'll be back in a few days, Mom, I promised. I'll take the bus. It's not so bad. I love you. I thought I saw the faintest hint of a smile on her lips, but it might have just been wishful thinking. Walking out of the hospice that day, I felt stronger. The visit hadn't been a burden. It had been a reinforcement. It reminded me what I was fighting for. I wasn't just fighting for my own freedom. I was fighting to honor her, to be the strong, independent person she had always raised me to be. The bus ride back felt shorter. I wasn't running from anything anymore. I was heading towards something. Towards home. When I walked through the door, my grandparents were waiting. They didn't ask how it went. They could see it on my face. There's a letter for you, Grandma said, pointing to the small table in the entryway. I looked down. It was a thick, official-looking envelope. The return address was from a law firm in Richard's town. My blood ran cold. He hadn't given up. He was coming after me. The wall my grandfather had built wasn't as impenetrable as I had thought. The envelope felt heavy in my hand, a physical manifestation of the dread that was now coiling in my stomach. All the peace I had found during the day, all the strength I had gathered at my mother's side, evaporated in an instant. The battle wasn't over. It was just changing venues, moving from the living room to the courtroom. My hands trembled as I tore open the seal. Grandpa stepped closer, placing a steadying hand on my shoulder. Whatever it is, we'll face it together, he said, his voice a low rumble. I pulled out the sheaf of papers. They were dense with legal jargon, a forest of words like petitioner, respondent, and custodial rights. But the message was brutally clear. Richard had filed a formal petition with the family court. He was claiming that my grandparents had unlawfully removed a minor from his care and was demanding my immediate return to his custody. He was painting himself as the concerned father, worried about his son who had been manipulated by his maternal grandparents during a vulnerable time. The hypocrisy was so staggering it made me feel nauseous. He had twisted the entire narrative, casting himself as the hero and me as a confused, misguided child. He had erased Brenda, her sister, and the whole ugly confrontation over babysitting. In his version of the story, he was simply a loving father trying to rescue his son. That son of a... Grandpa muttered under his breath, reading over my shoulder. His hand on my shoulder tightened, not in anger at me, but at the sheer audacity of the man he once called his son-in-law. What do we do? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The papers felt like a death sentence. The thought of being forced to go back to that house, to live under the thumb of a man who had just declared legal war on me, was terrifying. Grandma took the papers from my trembling hand. Her face, usually so soft and kind, was set in a hard, determined line. The first thing we do is not panic, she said, her voice firm. And the second thing we do is call Frank Peterson. Frank Peterson was an old friend of my grandfather's, a semi-retired lawyer who lived in the next town over. Grandpa was on the phone within minutes, explaining the situation in clipped, angry sentences. I could only hear one side of the conversation, but it was enough. Yeah, he's claiming we kidnapped him. No, the boy left on his own. It was after Richard and his fiancée tried to force him to babysit. Absolutely, there's a pattern of neglect. What do you need from us? He listened for a long moment, nodding. Okay, Frank. We'll be there. Monday morning. 10 o'clock. Thank you. He hung up the phone and looked at me. We have an appointment with our lawyer on Monday. Frank says Richard doesn't have a leg to stand on, but we need to be smart about this. We need to fight back, hard. The weekend was agonizing. The legal threat hung over the house like a storm cloud. I tried to distract myself, but my mind kept replaying worst-case scenarios. A judge ordering me to go back. Richard, smug and victorious. Brenda, with her fake, pitying smiles. It felt like the walls were closing in all over again. On Monday morning, we drove to Frank Peterson's office. It was a small, unassuming place above a bakery. Frank was a man in his late 60s with kind eyes and a handshake as solid as oak. He listened patiently as I recounted the entire story, starting from the day I moved in with Richard. I told him everything: the financial arrangement, the emotional neglect, the constant feeling of being a ghost in the house. I told him about the fight, about Brenda's demands, about her sister's accusations, about the moment I decided I couldn't take it anymore. When I was finished, Frank leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen on his legal pad. Richard made a very big mistake, he said, a small, grim smile on his face. He's banking on the idea that you're just a kid, that your testimony won't hold up. He's trying to bully you, and the court doesn't take kindly to that. He then looked at my grandparents. Martha, do you have any documentation? Emails, texts, anything from Richard over the years regarding child support? Grandma nodded, pulling a thick folder from her bag. I saved everything, she said. For the next hour, Frank laid out our strategy. It was no longer about defense. It was about offense. We would file a counter-petition. We would argue that Richard was an unfit parent, not because of any single event, but because of a sustained, 17-year pattern of disinterest and neglect, culminating in an attempt to emotionally exploit his grieving son for free labor. The babysitting incident is our smoking gun, Frank explained. It's not about the babysitting itself. It's about what it represents. It shows his complete and utter failure to consider your emotional state, Leo. You, a minor whose mother is in hospice care, were treated as a household convenience. That is a powerful argument. He said we would need to gather evidence. My testimony was key. My grandparents' testimony and their folder of emails were crucial. He even suggested getting a statement from my boss at the bookstore to attest to my character and work ethic. I walked out of that office feeling like I could breathe again. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with something else, a flicker of hope. I wasn't a victim waiting for a verdict. I was a fighter, and I had a team in my corner. The next few weeks were a strange mix of normal life and legal preparation. I went to school, I worked my shifts at the bookstore, and I spent my evenings with Frank, going over my statement, making sure every detail was accurate. It was draining, reliving all of it, but Frank said it was necessary. The truth was our greatest weapon. The court date was set for a month after Richard filed his petition. The night before, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. What if the judge didn't believe me? What if Richard, with his confident smile and expensive suit, was more convincing? Grandpa must have heard me tossing and turning. He appeared at my door around midnight, holding 2 mugs. Hot chocolate, he said simply, handing one to me. We sat on the edge of my bed in silence for a few minutes, sipping the warm, sweet drink. I'm scared, I finally admitted, the words feeling small in the quiet room. He nodded. I know you are. It's okay to be scared. Being scared means you have something to lose. But it doesn't mean you're weak. He looked me in the eye, his gaze steady. Tomorrow, you're going to walk into that courtroom and you're going to do the hardest thing you've ever had to do. You're going to tell your story. You're not going to yell, you're not going to cry. You're just going to tell the truth, calmly and clearly. The truth has a weight to it, Leo. Let it do the work. The next day, in the cold, imposing courtroom, I held on to his words like a talisman. Richard was there, across the room, sitting next to a slick-looking lawyer. Brenda was sitting behind him, her face pale and anxious. She wouldn't look at me. The hearing began, and it was as brutal as I had feared. Richard's lawyer portrayed him as a saint, a father who had welcomed his troubled son with open arms, only to have his heart broken. He painted me as an unstable, angry teenager, easily influenced by my resentful grandparents. When it was our turn, Frank was methodical. He presented the emails. He questioned my grandparents. Then, he called me to the stand. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I walked to the witness box, my legs feeling like lead. I sat down and looked at the judge, a stern-faced woman with intelligent eyes. Frank led me through my story, his questions calm and precise. I just focused on his voice and on my grandfather's words from the night before. Tell the truth. Let it do the work. I spoke about my mom. I spoke about the move. I spoke about the coldness in the house, the feeling of being invisible. And then, I spoke about that Saturday. When it was time for Richard's lawyer to cross-examine me, he came at me hard. He tried to twist my words, to make me sound like a spoiled brat. So, you were asked to help the family for a few hours, and you refused, he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. I was told to babysit so they could go out, I corrected him, my voice shaking slightly but holding steady. It wasn't a request. It was a demand. A demand you felt justified in refusing, even though your father provides for you. My father provides a room in his house, I said. My grandparents and I provide for everything else. But that's not the point. The point is my mom is in a hospice. She's dying. And they wanted me to watch their kids so they could go to a spa. They didn't ask how I was feeling. They didn't seem to care. They just wanted a free sitter. I saw a flicker of something on the judge's face. An eyebrow raised. A subtle shift in her posture. The lawyer tried to recover. You seem to have a lot of anger towards your father, don't you, Leo? I took a breath. No, I said, and the honesty of it surprised even me. I don't. I'm just disappointed. And I'm tired. I'm tired of being treated like I don't matter. After I stepped down, the judge called for a brief recess. When she returned, her expression was unreadable. She looked at Richard. She looked at me. In the matter of the custody of Leo Miller, she began, her voice echoing in the silent room. I have heard the testimony from both sides. While it is true that Mr. Richard Miller is the legal custodial parent, custody is not just a right. It is a profound responsibility. She paused, and her gaze settled on Richard. It was a gaze so sharp and piercing that I saw him physically flinch. A responsibility, she continued, her voice like ice, that it appears you have failed to grasp in any meaningful way for the entirety of this child's life. This petition is not born from a place of parental concern. It is born from a place of control and, frankly, retaliation. It is a gross abuse of the court's time and an act of profound cruelty to a son who is currently navigating one of the most difficult circumstances a child can face. My jaw dropped. Grandpa reached over and squeezed my hand. The judge wasn't finished. Therefore, I am denying your petition. Furthermore, I am granting temporary emergency custody to the maternal grandparents, Mr. and Mrs. Miller, pending a full custody hearing. And I am ordering you, Mr. Miller, to begin paying child support to them, effective immediately, retroactive to the date Leo came into their care. A strangled gasp came from Brenda's direction. Richard's face had gone from red to a sickly, pale white. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. The judge looked at me then, and for the first time, her expression softened. Leo, she said, her voice now gentle. You have shown more maturity and integrity than any of the adults in this situation. Go home with your grandparents. Focus on your schoolwork. And most importantly, spend time with your mother. No one can fault you for that. She banged her gavel. It was over. We walked out of the courtroom into the bright sunlight. I felt dazed, like I had just stepped off a roller coaster. I had won. We had won. As we walked down the courthouse steps, I saw Richard and Brenda standing by their car. He was yelling at her, his face twisted in a mask of fury. She was sobbing, her hands over her face. Their perfect, curated life had just imploded. The free ride was over. The consequences had finally arrived. And it had nothing to do with me anymore. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt quiet. Grandpa put his arm around my shoulders. Come on, kid, he said. Let's go home. The word home had never sounded so sweet. The drive back from the courthouse was the polar opposite of the tense, fearful journey there. The air in the truck was light. My grandparents were talking quietly in the front seat, their voices filled with a relief so profound it was almost tangible. I sat in the back, watching the world go by, feeling the tight, painful knot that had been lodged in my chest for weeks finally begin to unravel. We didn't win a victory so much as we won our peace. The judge's words echoed in my mind, not the legal rulings, but what she had said to me. You have shown more maturity and integrity. Go home. Spend time with your mother. It was permission. Permission to let go of the fight, to stop looking over my shoulder, and to focus on what truly mattered. Life settled into a new, quiet rhythm. The shadow of the court case was gone, and in its absence, everything else felt brighter, more real. I focused on school, on my job at the bookstore, on the simple, comforting routines of life at my grandparents' house. I helped Grandpa chop wood for the coming winter. I learned Grandma's secret recipe for apple pie. I wasn't just a guest anymore, I was a part of the household, contributing not out of obligation, but out of a genuine desire to be there. My visits to the hospice became the anchor of my week. The long bus ride no longer felt like a chore. It was a pilgrimage. It was time for me to mentally prepare, to shed the skin of my daily life and step into that quiet, sacred space with my mom. I would sit with her for hours, holding her hand, telling her about my day. I told her about the court case, about the judge's words, about the look on Richard's face. I told her we were safe now, that she didn't have to worry. Her hand would squeeze mine, her thumb would rub against my knuckles, and I knew she understood. In her silence, there was a universe of love. One afternoon, as I was sitting with her, a new nurse came in to check her vitals. She was a kind, older woman with warm eyes. "You're a good son, Leo," she said, adjusting my mom's pillows. "You're here so often. She's lucky to have you." "I'm the lucky one," I said, my voice thick. "I know," the nurse said, patting my arm. "The ones we love are always a gift, no matter how long we have them." Her words stayed with me. A gift. My time with my mom wasn't a sad obligation. It was a gift. Every moment, every squeeze of her hand, every flicker of recognition in her eyes was precious. And I was determined not to waste a second of it. I started bringing things to her. Not things she could use, but things that could connect her to the world outside her room. I brought a brightly colored leaf I found on the way to the bus stop, its edges tinged with the fire of autumn. I described the crisp air and the blue sky. I brought a book from the store, one with beautiful photographs of faraway mountains, and I described what it would feel like to stand on one of those peaks. I was trying to bring the world to her, since she could no longer go to it. My life was divided into two parts, the quiet, gentle world I was building with my grandparents and my mom, and the silent, empty space where Richard used to be. I had no contact with him or Brenda. After the court case, it was like they had fallen off the face of the earth. And I was profoundly grateful for the silence. About 6 months after the court hearing, I was at work, shelving a new shipment of paperbacks. My boss, Mr. Henderson, a quiet, scholarly man who had given a glowing statement to our lawyer, called me over to the counter. "Leo," he said, pushing a local newspaper across the counter towards me. "I think you might want to see this." I looked at him, confused, then down at the paper. It was open to the classified section, a page I never read. He had circled a small ad with a red pen. It was an ad for an estate sale. "Entire household contents must go," it read in bold letters. The address listed was shockingly familiar. It was Richard and Brenda's house. I stared at the ad, my mind struggling to process it. An estate sale. That's what people did when they were moving far away, or when someone had passed. But this was different. This was a fire sale. A sign of desperation. "What happened?" I asked, my voice a whisper. Mr. Henderson shrugged, his expression sympathetic. "I'm not one to listen to gossip, but the talk around town is that they're in financial trouble. Deep trouble. He lost his job a couple of months back. And I guess without his salary, and with having to pay for childcare and now child support for you, things fell apart." I just stood there, the newspaper cold in my hands. I thought about Richard's pride, his obsession with money and appearances. Losing his job, being forced to sell off his possessions, having his failure advertised in the local paper for everyone to see for him, it would be a fate worse than death. "Are you okay?" Mr. Henderson asked, his voice gentle. I nodded slowly. "Yeah," I said. "I'm okay." And the strange thing was, I was. I didn't feel a surge of satisfaction. I didn't feel a desire for revenge. I just felt nothing. A quiet, detached emptiness. Their life, their problems, their self-inflicted downfall had nothing to do with me. It was a story about two people I used to know. That weekend, out of a morbid curiosity I couldn't quite explain, I asked my grandpa to drive me past the house. We didn't stop. We just drove by slowly. The lawn was overgrown. A large, garish, "for sale" sign was hammered into the middle of it. Cars I didn't recognize were parked up and down the street. People were milling around the driveway, carrying out lamps and boxes and pieces of furniture. Strangers were picking through the wreckage of the life Richard and Brenda had tried to build. I saw a woman carry out the massive flat-screen TV, Richard's pride and joy. She needed another person to help her load it into the back of a truck. I saw another family examining the fancy patio furniture Brenda had been so proud of. It was a sad, pathetic scene. A monument to a life built on a foundation of selfishness and poor choices. As we drove away, I didn't look back. There was nothing there for me to see. A few months later, as winter began to fade into the first hints of spring, my mom's condition took a turn for the worse. The doctors at the hospice called us in for a meeting. They were gentle, but their words were clear. It was time. Her body was tired. The fight was coming to an end. The news hit me hard, but it wasn't a surprise. I had been preparing for this moment for years, in a way. The days that followed were a blur of quiet vigils by her bedside. My grandparents and I took turns, making sure one of us was with her at all times. I spent my time talking to her, reading to her, playing her favorite music softly on my phone. I held her hand, memorizing the feel of it in mine. I thanked her. I thanked her for being my mom, for loving me, for making me strong. I told her it was okay to let go, that we would be okay. She passed away on a Tuesday morning, just as the sun was beginning to stream through her window. It was peaceful. She just slipped away. One moment she was breathing, the next, she wasn't. I was holding her hand when it happened. The grief was immense, a vast, empty ocean. But it wasn't a violent, stormy sea. It was a quiet, deep sorrow. I had been grieving her for years, a little bit at a time, as the disease stole more and more of her. This was just the final, painful chapter. At the small, simple funeral service, I stood up to speak. I looked out at the small gathering of friends and family, my grandparents sitting in the front row, their faces etched with their own grief. Richard and Brenda were not there. I hadn't invited them. I didn't even know where they were. My mom loved sunflowers, I began, my voice steady. She said they always knew how to find the light, no matter how dark it seemed. And she taught me to do the same. Even when things were hard, she always found a reason to smile, a moment of light to hold on to. She was the strongest person I've ever known. And she made me strong. The best way I can honor her is to live my life the way she taught me, to always, always look for the sun. I didn't cry. I just felt a profound sense of love and gratitude. She had given me the tools I needed to survive. She had been my light. Life after the funeral was a landscape of quiet adjustment. The gaping hole my mother left behind could never be filled, but my grandparents and I learned how to live around it. We filled the silence with shared memories, with laughter, with the simple, steady rhythm of our lives. Her presence was still there, in the sunflowers Grandma planted in the garden in her memory, in the way Grandpa would hum one of her favorite songs while he worked in his garage. She wasn't gone. She had just changed form. I graduated from high school that spring. I stood on the stage, accepted my diploma, and the first people I looked for in the crowd were my grandparents. They were on their feet, clapping louder than anyone, their faces beaming with a pride that was so pure and unconditional it brought a lump to my throat. I had done it. Despite everything, I had made it. I had been accepted into the local community college, planning to get my general education requirements out of the way before transferring to a 4-year university. It was a practical, affordable plan, one that I had come up with myself. I worked full-time at the bookstore that summer, saving every penny. My life was my own, built from the ground up with my own 2 hands, supported by the unwavering love of my grandparents. One hot, lazy afternoon in late July, about 1.5 years after I had walked out of Richard's house for the last time, a strange thing happened. I was working the register at the bookstore when the little bell above the door jingled. I looked up from the book I was scanning and froze. It was Brenda. I barely recognized her. The perfectly coiffed blonde hair was gone, replaced by a dull, mousy brown pulled back in a messy ponytail. She was thinner, and the expensive, stylish clothes she used to wear had been replaced by a faded t-shirt and worn-out jeans. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her face was etched with a permanent, weary frown. She was holding the hand of a little boy who looked to be about 2 years old, Liam. Lily was trailing behind her, looking older, her expression sullen. She didn't see me at first. She was distracted, trying to keep Lily from pulling books off a low shelf. "Lily, stop that. I told you, we are only looking at the sale section." Her voice had lost its shrill, demanding edge. Now it was just tired. Utterly, completely tired. Then, her eyes scanned the store and landed on me, standing behind the counter. Her face went through a rapid series of emotions, shock, recognition, embarrassment, and then a flash of something that looked like resentment. She quickly looked away, pretending she hadn't seen me, and steered the kids towards the back of the store. I stood there, my heart pounding a slow, steady rhythm. I wasn't scared or angry. I was just stunned. It was like seeing a ghost from a past life. A few minutes later, she approached the counter, placing a single, heavily discounted children's book in front of me. She refused to make eye contact, staring at a point just over my shoulder. Liam was fussing in her arms, and Lily was whining about wanting a different book. "Just this one, please," she said, her voice a low mumble. I took the book and scanned it. "That'll be $3.21, I said, my voice neutral. She fumbled in her purse, her hands shaking slightly as she pulled out a crumpled $5 bill. As I gave her the change, our fingers brushed for a fraction of a second. It felt like a spark of static electricity, a brief connection to a world I had long since left behind. She still wouldn't look at me. She just grabbed the change and the book and turned to leave. But as she was herding her kids towards the door, she paused. She turned back, and for the first time, her eyes met mine. They were full of a weary, beaten-down sadness. "I heard about your mom," she said, her voice barely audible. I'm sorry." It was the first genuine, human thing she had ever said to me. The apology wasn't for the spa day, or the fight, or the court case. It was for my mom. It was 2 years too late, but it was there. I just nodded. "Thank you," I said. It was all that needed to be said. She gave a small, jerky nod in return and then practically fled from the store, pulling her 2 unhappy children behind her. I watched them go, a strange sense of finality settling over me. That was it. That was the end of the chapter. There was no grand confrontation, no satisfying, "I told you so." There was just the quiet, pathetic reality of her life. Later that evening, I told my grandparents what had happened. Grandpa shook his head. "Heard through the grapevine that Richard left her," he said, not looking up from the newspaper he was reading. "Took a job in another state and just disappeared. Left her with the kids and a mountain of debt. She had to move into a tiny apartment on the other side of town. Karma. It wasn't a lightning bolt from the heavens. It was slow. It was methodical. It was the natural, inevitable consequence of their own actions. Richard, the man who ran from all his responsibilities, had finally run from the last one. And Brenda, who had wanted a man to provide her with a perfect life, was left with nothing. They had built their house on a foundation of convenience and selfishness, and it had crumbled into dust, burying them both in the rubble. I thought about them, just for a moment. I pictured Richard in some new town, probably already spinning a new story, building a new, hollow life. I pictured Brenda in her tiny apartment, struggling to raise 2 kids on her own, the ghost of the easy life she thought she deserved haunting her every move. And I felt nothing but a profound sense of distance. Their story was over. But mine was just beginning. A few weeks later, I was driving my grandfather's old pickup truck, the one he had given me as a graduation present. The windows were down, and the warm summer air was rushing in, carrying the scent of cut grass and freedom. I was on my way to my first evening class at the community college. I had a thermos of coffee on the seat next to me, a textbook I had paid for with my own money, and a future that was a wide-open road. I thought about my mom and her sunflowers, always turning towards the light. I thought about my grandparents, whose love had been my shield and my sanctuary. I thought about the boy who had walked out of a house into the darkness, with nothing but a backpack and a desperate hope for something better. He had found it. I turned up the radio, a familiar country song filling the cab of the truck. I smiled, my eyes on the road ahead. I was free. I was whole. And I was finally, truly, on my way home.